49, Lift Every Voice and Sing, and it is a song that we need to approach with care. So I'm going to tell you why. Lift Every Voice and Sing was written in the early 1900s, and this hymn was first performed by a group of young black children in a segregated school in Jacksonville, Florida, to honor Booker T. Washington. It became popular almost immediately, and by 1919, the NAACP dubbed it the African American National Anthem. It is said that this was one of Martin Luther King Jr.'s favorite hymns. And we cannot separate this song and several other spirituals in our hymnal from the ongoing struggle for black liberation. So it is appropriate for us to use it this Sunday because today we're talking about the eighth principle, a principle that is explicitly connected to the work of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King and is championed by many Unitarian Universalists of color. But we want to use it with care, knowing that it is a gift from the living tradition of black liberation within our movement. We approach this hymn, and honestly, today's entire topic, with humility. One of the ways that a majority white congregation can express this humble and grateful posture when singing these kinds of hymns is to remember that they are being loaned to us by the wider black community. We here do not own them. For this reason, we have made a small voluntary donation to the Black Lives of Unitarian Universalism in gratitude for the use of this song today and in recognition that this song is something that we are borrowing, not something that we are entitled to. Amy Kinley is going to come up here and lead us in our song, so please rise in body or spirit as we lift every voice and sing. The rest is false. You are whole or broken. Who you love is acceptable or not. Life tells its truth in many hues, but we are taught to think in either or. To believe the teachings of Jesus or Buddha. To believe in human potential or a power beyond a single will. I am broken or powerful. Life embraces multiple truths, speaks of both and of and. We are taught to see in absolutes, good versus evil, male versus female, old versus young, gay versus straight. Let us see the fractions, the spectrum, the margins. Let us open our hearts to the complexity of our worlds. Let us make our lives sanctuaries to nurture our many identities. The day is coming when all will know that the rainbow is more gorgeous than the monochrome, that a river of identities can ebb and flow over the static, stubborn rocks in its course, that the margins hold the center. Welcome to the Holston Valley Unitarian Universalist Church. I'm the Reverend Tiffany Sapp, and I am the minister of this church. As we begin today, I want to remind you to silence your cell phones and to be mindful of the variety of interaction levels preferred by the people in our community here, indicated by red, yellow, and green wristbands. I'm so glad you could be with us today. If you're with us on the internet, or if you're with us sitting in the chairs around me, we are one community united in our commitment to each other and our commitment to live out our principles in this world. And speaking of principles, today we take a look at the grassroots movement to add an 8th principle to the 7 principles of Unitarian Universalism. In 1961, when the Unitarians and the Universalist churches merged, they adopted 6 principles as a covenant. 6. Essentially, they said, these are the commitments that we make to each other, these are the goals that we share, and these are the ways that we want to work together as we try to make these goals a reality. In 1985, the Unitarian Universalist Association added a 7th principle, and you can find that current list of 7 principles right here on the front of our bulletin. Now, 170 Unitarian Universalist congregations of the approximately 1,000 congregations in the U.S., plus the entire Canadian Unitarian Council, has adopted the 8th principle. So we're going to take a look at why this movement is picking up steam in so many Unitarian Universalist congregations. Anastasia Barash, a member of the Unitarian Universalist organization Allies for Racial Equity, wrote this chalice lighting specifically for Unitarian Universalists that are learning about the 8th principle.
As we light this flame of hope, may our congregation become a kaleidoscope of souls and people. An as-direct flame-like pattern in bright gold colors and a black background. In the presence of this flame, in me, in you, in us, is an invitation to sit at the table. May we tend our soul fire through these challenging and trying times to open our hearts and minds of all who enter our doors. Good morning, I'm Wayne Johnson, your service leader here at Holston Valley Unitarian Universalist Church. We welcome you, old friends and new friends, young and old. You are an essential part of our celebration today. Whether today is your first or your 1000th Sunday with us, we are stronger because of your presence. We are one people of many beliefs, many origins, sexualities, and genders. We are all growing, all learning, all loved. Just as you are welcome here. One of the best things about a Time for All Ages story is that it takes a complicated issue and does its best to simplify it. Today, Reverend Karen G. Johnson and Jessica Hess describes how the 8th principle might fit with the other 7.
Did you know that love is a really big deal in Unitarian Universalism? I bet you did, because we just can't stop talking about it.
Love this. Side with love that. Justice is what love looks like in public. We weren't the first ones to say that. Dr. Cornel West was. But we love it so much that we sing it back to him and the whole universe all the time.
There was once a scientist guy who asked all kinds of people, not just Unitarian Universalists, what they thought of love and how important it was for them. His name was Robert Miller. It turns out that of all the groups he studied, whether religious or not, UUs rank love as a core value more so than others do.
So I guess love really is a big deal for UUs.
I want you to remember that because we're going to come back to that.
Another big deal in Unitarian Universalism is our principles. They are a big part of our covenant with each other.
We know they're a big deal because we have so many ways to talk about them to make sure that all of our different brains and bodies and ages understand them. There's this way, which is really just a list in English.
There's this way. It's the list in Spanish.
And this way. There's a list, which is a language for kids.
And there's this way, which is the language for kids, but in a rainbow.
And there's this cool way, which shows not a linear way to think about the relationship between the different principles. So many ways.
All of these ways are focused on the 7 principles. When Unitarian Universalism first came into being in 1961, there were actually only 6 principles. Our 7th principle was proposed in 1985. That's the year I graduated from high school, and it was officially added in 1987. Lately, I have been thinking about the way that we see our principles. I was thinking about this way in particular. It was originally thought of by Reverend Barbara Wells Tenhove, and it's called the Keystone Arch. It's like an arch or a doorway through which we can enter into that space towards which our faith calls us.
It's kind of cool because the 4th principle, the free and responsible search for truth and meaning, is at the center, holding together the space for us to balance between each individual's inherent worth and the needs of the greater community of which we are a part. But do doorways or archways ever exist all by themselves, just floating in the air?
Not really, right? They are usually stabilized on the ground, or they're part of a larger structure, a building, a house, a home.
So maybe there's a principle that's still missing.
Just like we figured out 35 years ago when we decided to add the 7th principle. I think for a lot of people, that's one of the most important principles. So maybe the missing principle is the ground on which the arch of the 7 are built.
Maybe it's the whole house of love we are always trying to create for ourselves, each other, and the world.
maybe if we add an eighth principle, if we add the eighth principle, we will get closer to the beloved community we dream about, where there is no oppression of any kind, where we can say Black Lives Matter, but we don't have to because they already do.
I want to be a part of building this house of love. Do you?
We are being invited to build a house of love together. And houses don't happen on accident. They are built intentionally or not at all. The eighth principle is a statement about being intentional about this building process, and here's what it says. It's on the back of your bulletin. We covenant to affirm and promote journeying towards spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and our institutions. What words jump out at you here? Journeying towards spiritual wholeness, multicultural, beloved community, dismantle racism and other oppressions. There is a lot here and a lot to think about. The eighth principle is definitely as ambitious and as expansive as the other seven. Let's take a moment to reflect as we hear our musical offering. Dona nobis pacem, which in Latin means grant us peace. As we see the stunning spiral visuals of the music and we see how interconnected this world is, let that be our prayer. Grant us peace.
Dona nobis pacem, pacem. Dona nobis pacem.
Dona nobis pacem. Dona nobis pacem. Dona nobis pacem, pacem. Dona nobis pacem. Dona nobis pacem, pacem. Dona nobis pacem.
Today, before we move into our joys and concerns, we have a special moment of joy and gratitude in our community. This congregation has expressed that a commitment to social justice has been a key part of our identity for a long time. And for many, many years, that social justice commitment was led by two extraordinary people, Kim and Doug Chaffin. I was told to surprise you, Doug, so here we go. With Kim as their chair and Doug as a constant supportive and humorous presence in their meetings, they helped our congregation live out our values in a variety of ways. Their passion for the environment and in feeding the hungry especially have stood out. It is an honor to present Doug, and I'm sure he will convey it to Kim, with this plaque that the Social Justice Committee has made in honor of your many years of service. I know, yes. You're going to give him a chance to clap, and then I'm going to read it. It says, in grateful appreciation to Kim and Doug Chaffin for your dedication to the HVUUC Social Justice Committee and your leadership in encouraging social change in our community for the past decade. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
What a wonderful joy to have so many people making so many contributions to helping us be the people we want to be here. Come to this community with all that you are. Your joys and concerns are welcome here. We share our moments of joys and sorrows through using these candle cards. If you are with us in person, or you can email me at minister@hvuuc.org with the words candle card in the subject line. Please make sure to indicate whether or not you would like the card read aloud in the service, because we are still being broadcast publicly on YouTube. I have a card from a young lady whose message to us is, how do people grieve over death? And so I want to hold her and all of us in this community who are experiencing grief in our hearts during this time. If you want a candle to be lit for yourself, or a loved one, or a situation close to your heart, I invite you to make that request by standing or raising your hand when loving kindness plays, which will happen in just a moment. Then I will acknowledge each of you with a motion of my hand, and then you can sit down or lower your hand after I acknowledge you. And we light our first candle for you who are not in the building, but are ever in our hearts and minds. And we light a final candle for all that remains unspoken in our hearts and minds.
Our reading is a reflection by Reverend Kayama Raman, a Unitarian Universalist minister who is living and working in the Virgin Islands as an advocate for Black female Unitarian Universalists and as a conflict engagement coach.
In this reading, she speaks about her ancestors quite a bit. We see here in this piece that we cannot separate the author's context from the content of what she's sharing. That her ancestors' journey to this world was very different from my ancestors' journey to this world. Dr. Ramon's context means everything here. So as you hear Wayne and I reading her words, do not forget who is really speaking them. A Black woman who identifies strongly with the story of her ancestors.
Now is the time to call on the memories of the ancestors who thought they could not walk another step toward freedom, and yet they did.
It is that time and place to call on the memories of the ancestors who, when the darkness of their lives threatened to take away the hope and light, reached a little deeper and prayed yet another prayer.
It is that time and place to remember those who come through the long night to witness another sunrise.
It is that time and place to remember the oceans of tears shed to deliver us to this time, to remember the bent knees and bowed backs, to remember the fervent voices asking, begging, beseeching for loved ones sold off.
Time to remember their laughter and joy, though they had far less and little reason for optimism, yet they stayed on the path toward a better day.
Time to hold to the steadfast hands and hearts and prayers of the ancestors who brought us this far. Time to make them proud and show them and ourselves what we are made of.
Time to show them that their prayers and sacrifices and lives were not in vain and did not go unnoticed, nor have they been forgotten.
Did you not know that this day would come? Did you not know that we would have to change places? Did you not know that just as our ancestors were delivered, that you would also be delivered?
Have you not seen the greatness and power of the creative energy in the universe called God, that moves and has its being through human agency?
Have you not seen God in your neighbors' faces, in the homeless, in the battered woman, the trafficked child, the undocumented worker, the dispossessed? It is that time and that place to know that it is our turn, that we must leave a legacy for our children and all the children.
It is that time and that place. We are the ones we've been waiting for. For that, let us be eternally grateful.
Reverend Dr. Kiama Rahman, in sharing the stories of her ancestors' struggle, resilience, and hope, says, they stayed on the path toward a better day. And she points us to it being our turn. She tells us that we too will be ancestors in time, that the choices that we make and the things that we decide now will create the legacy that our children will hopefully carry forward with them. And really, that's the way it's always been with us humans. We look back to the wisdom and strength of our ancestors, and we look forward to the future, knowing that our creative energy and the power of our choices will shape that future for those who come after us. One of the things that I love about Unitarian Universalism is that we're honest about that process. While many religions will speak of having a closed canon, meaning that the sacred texts and foundational principles of their religion are set and cannot be changed, we Unitarian Universalists do the opposite. We talk about being a living tradition. We embrace the sense that religions should naturally change over time because the humans that religion serves and guides also continue to grow. We keep changing in our understanding of how the world works, what is ethical, what our most foundational ideas should look like, and even the nature of humanity itself. Which is why it doesn't surprise me that many Unitarian Universalist congregations have adopted the 8th principle, and that there are signs of gradual moves towards its consideration at the Unitarian Universalist Association as a whole. After all, the first 6 principles are only 61 years old, which really isn't old at all when it comes to people, and even more so when it comes to religious tenets. And the 7th principle is 38 years old, meaning that even I am older than the 7th principle. The whippersnapper that I am. We are absolutely a living religion. We allow ourselves to continue to change and shift as our understanding of ourselves, the world, and what is needed most also change and shift. And I wouldn't have it any other way. In fact, I would guess that the openness to continuing to expand our point of view is one of the things that has brought us here today and keeps us coming back. So now, here in 2022, the Black lives of Unitarian Universalism and the diverse revolutionary Unitarian Universalist ministries, which is a very long name, but the acronym is DRUM, which is kind of cool. And they're the Multicultural People of Color organization. They are asking us to make an explicit statement to work against racism and build the beloved community together through the 8th principle. And this isn't something to jump into lightly. It's something that we approach with reverence and care. We begin this conversation with a deep sense of responsibility to our ancestors, our future, and the present realities of our existing communities. So today is the very beginning of what I hope will be an ongoing conversation. So I would like to invite you to consider today's sermon not as the sum of all that we need to consider, but instead just a taste of what I hope will be an exploratory feast around these issues. And so I will follow the lead of my philosophy and theology professors and begin by defining some terms. Highlighting and exploring some key terms is really all I'm going to manage today, but I hope that they will give us what we need to start thinking and talking about how the 8th principle relates to our living tradition. So, the proposed text, once again, which you can see in your bulletin, we covenant to affirm and promote journeying towards spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and our institutions. The first key phrase is journey towards spiritual wholeness. We are a living tradition on a journey. We don't arrogantly assume that we have already got being human figured out. If you've already got being human figured out, I'm really proud of you, and you should come explain it to me, because I'm still working on it. We are all on this lifelong journey of living and loving, and there is still so much to learn. I've already talked a lot about us being a living tradition, so I'm not going to belabor that point further. The next phrase is beloved community, and this phrase is really key to this principle. It's made even more important, to me at least, when I recognize that the word love is not used once in the first 7 principles. That's kind of strange, right? Because we really are all about love here. Beloved community is a phrase with a history, and it may be a phrase that you've heard me or my colleagues refer to before. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. used the term beloved community quite a bit, and a lot of us have picked it up from him. But long before him, the American philosopher Dr. Josiah Royce used this term in his 1913 lecture series, The Problem of Christianity. Dr. Royce, working from the Protestant Christian point of view over 100 years ago, conceived of the beloved community as being the incarnation of God's presence on earth. What was so special about his message was that it wasn't about waiting for some heavenly afterlife, but was all about creating a better world here and now. And this was revolutionary back in the early 1900s. He proposed that religious orientation should be about this world rather than about another world, and that we have our own creative power to do justice rather than sitting back and surrendering both responsibility and power to some sort of deity. He described the beloved community as being characterized by a deep, unconditional love that should be offered to all people, whether they were attached to the church or not. He said that none will be excluded. He said that none should be left behind. And he knew how audacious this ideal sounded, and his response to criticism for this audacity was just as audacious. He said, "Since you cannot find the universal and beloved community, create it. Do whatever you can to take steps toward it, or assist anybody to take steps towards the organization of that caring community." Dr. King, who studied Royce in seminary, took Royce's beloved community and blended it with concepts of agape love, which he had identified as the foundation of his Christian faith. In King's writing, An Experiment in Love, he says, agape is not a weak and passive love. It is love in action. Agape is love seeking to preserve and create community. Even as Unitarian Universalism has moved beyond its Christian roots to draw a wider, more inclusive circle, these roots do still inform our values. I hear the inherent worth and dignity in there. I hear the interconnectedness in there. I hear the call to community and the recognition that we cannot be our fullest and best versions of ourselves unless we are doing our part to build the beloved community together. I hear the very universalist ideal that none are excluded and none are left behind. Once you understand what beloved community is, can you see how it is at the heart of what we're trying to do here? When I really understand what the idea of beloved community is, I say an enthusiastic yes. Like our storytellers told us today, we are all about love here. And of course, for Dr. King and for us, a key part of this ideal beloved community, of this love, is that racism and other forms of oppression cannot have any part here. Where would we put oppression in the house of love? We cannot. It would tear down the house from its foundations. And so we are called to actively show racism the door. And this is where it gets tricky, because showing racism the door isn't always as easy as it may sound. Dr. Ibram X. Kendi's New York Times best-selling book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, invites us to stop thinking about racism in terms of the disposition of individuals, but instead think about policies and beliefs that exist in the collective. Many of us may hear the language of the eighth principle about dismantling racism and other oppressions in ourselves and our institutions and think, well, I'm not racist, no problem. But Dr. Kendi says that people cannot be not racist because we are existing in systems and beliefs that are set up to support racism by default. Like fish in the ocean, we don't even think about the water that we're swimming in. He says that by he I mean Dr. Kendi, says that we have started treating the word racist as a pejorative insult rather than the adjective that it is, that can be used to describe policies and beliefs that perpetuate racial inequality. That is a lot to unpack, and I highly recommend his book, which can give way more nuance than I can give in this little bitty talk. But I will see if I can use an example of my own life to kind of explain this a little better. I'm a white person. I have benefited from white generational wealth my whole life and a status quo that favors me. My ancestors were not subjected to slavery 157 years ago. My ancestors were not segregated into underfunded schools 68 years ago. And they weren't subjected to redlining real estate practices 54 years ago. So I have been able to build opportunities for myself on the shoulders of my ancestors who didn't have to push through any of these barriers. And I personally haven't had to deal with teachers ignoring my raised hand in the classroom because of their unexamined biases, something that Ibram Kendi saw regularly in his school as a black man. And he's younger than me. I haven't had potential employers put my resume in the rejection pile because my name sounded black, something that I had to challenge a former employer about. And I have never, ever been challenged for having an unprofessional hairstyle when I let this do what it does. I use these examples because it is behavior that is being engaged in by people who would insist loudly and repeatedly that they are not racist. Being not racist is a cop-out because doing nothing doesn't do anything but reinforce the status quo when these inequalities exist. The status quo still favors folks who look like me very much. Even if I'm not racist, it benefits the heck out of me, which is why if I want to live my values, I must do better than doing nothing. I must be anti-racist. Being actively anti-racist takes thoughtful intentionality. It means examining my own biases, working to take apart the racist status quo that has given me an advantage over everyone else, and listening to people of color that are telling me that there's still a problem. And that last part about listening to the people of color does not mean putting Unitarian Universalists of color on the spot either, expecting them to explain all of this to me. Because going out and learning on our own and not putting the burden of teaching white folks on these people of color is also being a good anti-racist. So I've done this by seeking out resources which were written by people who are directly affected by these oppressions, and I'm going to share some of them with you all. These resources are going to be posted to our website's e-news section by noon today. Or if you're subscribed to the e-news, it will be in your email Monday morning. And if you're not subscribed to our e-news and you'd like to be, you can go sign the visitor book over there, leave us your email address, and check the box that opts you into our news. So, beloved community is love in action. It is the expansive, nonviolent love for every person on this planet that motivates our vision and our mission here. Love for Black lives, love for every gay and trans person on the planet, love for children and families that have been imprisoned and separated, love for the earth, the air that we breathe, and the waterways that feed life, love for people who need health care and housing and food, love for children in need of an education and a hope for the future and the planet to keep going to give them a place to live. Love for all of us here. Love for all of us not here. The beloved community. An expansive love for all of us. We are on the path that the ancestors have set for us, and we are being invited to bring that which has been good forward with us and leave behind that which has done harm. Our ancestors are watching us, and so are our children and the world's children. Let's build the beloved community for them and for us. And maybe saying that building the beloved community is part of who we are in the principles could be a great way to start.
Our chalice extinguishing comes from Maya Angelou. Do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, do better.
Sometimes it don't want to go out.
All right.
Cool. Good job.
Thank you. It was hard.
We thank you all for being with us today. We hope that you are giving some thought to how you want to be part of this community that works together. We hope that you will linger after the service and join us for coffee. You can find the coffee and cookies out there. All right. And if you want some more intentional socializing time, maybe you want to try our game night this Saturday. There's information in your bulletin. Next week, we will have the fifth Sunday offering to benefit Jacobs Creek Nature Park. So come prepared to support them. And starting 2 Sundays from now, June 5th, we will start collecting food for our local food pantries again. The bus to DC for the Poor People's Campaign has enough seats purchased to go. And many of those seats are scholarship seats. If you know anyone, either in or out of this community, who would want to go to the March for Racial and Economic Equity, get them in touch with Bob or have them email sjchair@hvuuc.org. You can learn more about the many opportunities for fellowship, justice work, and working together by visiting our website, hvууc.org. and check out our news and events section.
Thank you for being with us today. It is such a gift to have you, and I hope you'll be back next week for Sarah Sanders' preaching debut, where she's going to talk to us all about change. I want to draw your attention to the insert in your bulletin, that big full page. On Thursday, June 9th at 6:30 p.m. on Zoom, we will have a special called Social Justice Call to Action meeting to vote on two separate position statements. One about reproductive freedoms, which will allow us to officially show up with our church sign for the number of events that are popping up around reproductive justice, and one about economic justice, which will allow our Washington, D.C. bus riders to bring our church banner with them to D.C. The full text of these statements, as well as information about the meeting itself, are in your insert. Please take a look at that. If you are interested in singing in the choir, I would encourage you to reach out to Karis, who is sitting right there. And I believe y'all might have a little talk after the service about that. And it's not too late to sign up for coffee hour. I think we've shared before that this is a wonderful entry-level volunteer opportunity that doesn't involve committee meetings or anything like that. And you'll get some support so that you know how to work our coffee makers, you know what's expected to you. And Michelle is going to have a sign-up sheet for that in there right by the coffee. So look for that. Bell Hooks has been a guiding light for many people. Her writings and thoughts have pointed us to intersectional justice, knowing that forms of oppression are interconnected, just like our collective liberation is interconnected. And here's what she has to say about love in action. We need to reclaim the concept of love, not as an abstract, all-embracing fantasy, but as a set of ethics, principles, values, and behaviors, a love that is justice in action. To begin by always thinking of love as an action rather than a feeling in one way is one way in which anyone using the word in this matter automatically assumes accountability and responsibility. Culturally, all spheres of life, politics, religion, the workplace, domestic households, intimate relationships, should and could have their foundation in a love ethic. At its most basic, that love ethic is why we're here. And so as we go from this place, may we see this world and all of its hurting, broken places through the eyes of love. May we hear the calling to act accountably and responsibly. May we respond in a way that strives to do our best as we strive to learn more about how to do better, until the day when the beloved community is a reality that we dwell within. Amy is about to come up here to lead us in our closing hymn, and this is also when we will pass the offering plate. The contributions that you make during the offering supports the ways that we build each other up within this community, and also gives us the resources we need to stretch out into the wider world to make a positive impact. If you're making a pledge payment, please mark it as such, and thank you so much for your contributions. This is hymn number 131, Love Will Guide Us. Hey, church.